The music in the grand ballroom was a living thing, a swirling, elegant beast made of string quartets and the soft, shimmering notes of a piano. It wrapped around the guests, men in sharp, dark tuxedos, and women in gowns that cost more than most people's cars. They laughed behind their hands, their eyes sparkling with a light that came from expensive champagne and the thrill of being close to so much power. This was Salvatore Rossi's world. Every painting on the silk-covered walls, every crystal glass on the silver trays, every single person breathing the perfumed air was there because he allowed it. He was the king of this castle, and everyone knew it. Everyone, that is, except for Isabella Marino. She stood by a large marble pillar, doing her best to become part of it. Her dress was simple, a deep blue that made her skin look like warm honey, but it was hopelessly plain next to the sequins and feathers around her. She wasn't a guest. She was a fixture, like a valuable but ignored statue. Her father, a man with more dreams than sense, had borrowed a very large sum of money from the previous Rossi boss. He had promised it would be for a sure-thing business deal. The deal had turned out to be anything but sure, and her father, swallowed by shame and fear, had simply vanished into the night, leaving his debt and his daughter behind. Salvatore had found a use for her. Isabella was a gifted art restorer, and the Rossi family had a vast, private collection of old masters that needed care. So her debt became her prison sentence. She was to live and work under Salvatore's roof until her work had paid off the money her father stole. It was a cage, even if the bars were made of gold, and the view was of priceless art. From his throne-like chair at the head of the room, Salvatore watched her. He was a man built of shadows and sharp angles, his jaw always tight, his dark eyes missing nothing. They called him the Wolf, and tonight he felt like one. He was growing impatient. All evening, Isabella had pointedly looked through him. When he moved, she found a reason to look away. When he spoke to a group near her, she studied the pattern on the floor. It was a silent rebellion, and it was starting to itch under his skin. He was a man who commanded fear and respect with a single glance. To be so completely ignored by this one woman, this prisoner in a blue dress, was a strange and irritating new experience. Isabella, for her part, was counting the minutes until she could escape to the quiet of her room. She felt the weight of Salvatore's gaze like a physical touch, hot and unsettling. She knew it was a game, a dangerous one. Showing fear would be a victory for him. Showing interest was unthinkable. So she chose the only weapon she had, complete and utter indifference. She let her eyes drift over the crowd, not really seeing the faces, just counting them, naming the colors of their ties, doing anything to keep her mind off the powerful man whose presence seemed to suck all the air from the room. Her wandering gaze accidentally landed on a man from a rival family, a man named Marco. He had been drinking too much and his eyes had been stuck on her for a while. Seeing her look back, he took it as an invitation. He swaggered over, a sloppy smile on his face. A beautiful flower shouldn't be left all alone in the corner, he slurred, reaching for her hand. Isabella pulled her hand back. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Marco's smile didn't falter. He moved closer, his body crowding her against the pillar. "Come on, one dance, don't be rude." His grip on her wrist tightened. The smell of whiskey on his breath made her stomach turn. A cold spike of fear shot through her. She looked around, but the other guests were deliberately looking away, not wanting to get involved. Across the room, Salvatore saw it all. He saw Marco approach. He saw Isabella's slight flinch. He saw the man grab her wrist. A slow, burning anger began to heat his blood. It wasn't just that Marco was touching what was his, though that was a large part of it. It was the look on Isabella's face, a mix of fear and defiance that she never showed him. This fool, this drunken idiot, was getting a reaction from her that Salvatore, with all his power, could not. The glass in his hand felt dangerously fragile. He stood up. It was a simple movement, but in that room, it was like a thunderclap. The chatter around him died instantly. The music seemed to play softer. The crowd of men nearest to him, his most trusted and most feared soldiers, instinctively took a step back, creating a wide path. They saw the storm in their boss's eyes and knew better than to be in its way. Salvatore didn't run. He walked, each step slow, deliberate, and heavy with purpose. His eyes were locked on Marco, who was still too drunk and too foolish to feel the change in the air. Salvatore moved through the partygoers, who parted for him like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination. He came to a stop right behind Marco. The man finally sensed the danger and turned around, his face going pale as he saw who it was. Salvatore didn't even look at him. His gaze was entirely on Isabella, whose wide eyes were now fixed on him, her fear of Marco completely replaced by a new, deeper terror. Salvatore's voice when he spoke was low, but it cut through the music and the silence like a blade. He held his hand out, palm up, to Isabella. "Dance with me," he commanded, "or I'll lose my patience." The threat wasn't in the words themselves, but in the quiet, deadly way he said them. It was a promise of violence, of ruin. It was a choice, but it was no choice at all. Every man in the immediate vicinity took another step back, some dropping their eyes to the floor. The message was clear. This was between the boss and his girl. No one else was to interfere. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mouth felt dry. She looked from his outstretched hand to his hard, unreadable face. She saw the anger there, but also something else, a fierce possessiveness that shocked her. With a trembling hand, she slowly placed her fingers in his. The moment her skin touched his, a jolt went through them both. His hand was warm and strong, his grip firm as he closed his fingers around hers. He pulled her gently but insistently away from the pillar and the stunned Marco, who was quickly pulled away by two of Salvatore's men, forgotten already. Salvatore led her to the center of the dance floor, the most visible spot in the entire room. He placed one hand on the small of her back, pulling her close against him until there was no space between them. She could feel the hard muscle of his chest, the warmth of his body through his clothes. She was still shaking, her legs feeling like water. "Look at me," he murmured, his voice a low rumble only for her. She forced her eyes up to meet his. They were a dark, stormy brown, and in their depths she saw the wolf he was named for. He began to move, guiding her effortlessly in the dance. "That man," Salvatore said, his lips close to her ear, making her shiver, "will not be touching you again. No one touches what is mine. Do you understand?" The words should have made her angry. They should have made her rebel. But wrapped in his strong arms, surrounded by a room full of people who were too scared to even watch directly, a strange feeling bloomed in her chest. It was a terrifying feeling, but it was also a thrilling one. She was his prisoner, yes, but in this moment, in his arms, she was also undeniably safe. And as the music swirled around them, Isabella didn't know what scared her more, Salvatore's dangerous world, or the terrifying thought that she might not want to leave it. The morning after the dance dawned with a quiet that felt heavy and significant. Isabella woke in the lavish guest room that served as her gilded cell. The memory of Salvatore's hand on her back, the intensity in his eyes felt like a dream, but the lingering sensation was far too real. She was no longer just a faceless debtor in his house. She was the woman he had claimed in front of everyone. The invisible walls of her cage had suddenly become very, very clear. Later that day, two of Salvatore's silent, suited men arrived at her old apartment and escorted her back to the Rossi mansion with her personal belongings. The move was not a request, it was a decree. She was given a new suite of rooms, larger and more opulent, with a balcony that overlooked a private, walled garden. It was a beautiful upgrade, but the lock on the main door to the hallway still turned from the outside. Her world had simply gotten more comfortable. It had not gotten any bigger. Her work began in earnest. The Rossi art collection was housed in a dedicated, climate-controlled wing of the mansion. It was there, surrounded by canvases, centuries old, that the first shift in their strange relationship began. Salvatore started to appear. At first, he would simply stand in the doorway, watching her work with an unreadable expression. Then he began to walk slowly through the room, pausing to look at the painting she was meticulously cleaning, his hands clasped behind his back. One afternoon, she was working on a small, dark landscape. Salvatore stood behind her for a long time, so still and quiet she almost forgot he was there. "He got the light wrong," Salvatore said, his voice making her jump. He pointed a finger at the way the setting sun hit a distant farmhouse in the painting. The shadow is too short for the time of day he was trying to paint. He was in a hurry, or he changed his mind halfway through. Isabella was stunned. She looked from the painting to his face, her professional curiosity overriding her caution. "You can see that?" "He was my mother's favorite," Salvatore said, his gaze distant. "She would tell me that the mistakes are what made it real. They proved the artist was human." He fell silent again, then turned and left as suddenly as he had arrived. That small moment was a crack in the fortress wall he presented to the world. After that, his visits became longer. He began to ask her questions, not as a boss to an employee, but with a genuine, probing curiosity. He wanted to know why she used a certain solvent, how she could tell if a canvas was original, what she felt when she looked at a particular painting. They began to have conversations that stretched into the evening, moving from the art room to his private library, a cavernous space filled with the smell of old leather and polish. It was in the library, surrounded by silent books, that Isabella saw a different man. The fearsome wolf was gone, replaced by a man who spoke about his mother's love of art and the heavy, lonely weight of the legacy he had inherited too young. He told her, his voice low and steady, how his own father had been betrayed and murdered by a trusted friend, forcing Salvatore to become the boss while he was still more of a boy than a man. "Trust is a luxury I cannot afford," he confessed one night, staring into the fire. "Everyone wants something. Everyone has a price." Isabella, in turn, found herself speaking more than she intended. She told him about her own dreams, not of great wealth or power, but of a quiet life. She described the small art gallery she had always wanted to open, a place where people could come and feel peaceful. She spoke of the crushing disappointment she felt when her father's actions not only saddled her with debt, but stole that simple future from her. She wasn't just talking to her captor. She was talking to a man who seemed to be truly listening for the first time in a long time. This new understanding was a fragile, trembling thing. It lived in the quiet hours in the library and the shared looks over a restored painting. But the real world, Salvatore's violent and dangerous world, was always waiting just outside the door to remind them of where they were. It happened late one night. Isabella was reading in her room when the first sound reached her, a distant pop, like a car backfiring, followed by another and then another. Then came the shouts, the sound of running feet, and the shattering of glass. Her blood ran cold. An attack. The mansion was under siege. Before her panic could fully take hold, her bedroom door was thrown open. There stood Salvatore, but he wasn't the calm, collected man from the library. This was the wolf in his rawest form. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were wild with a feral light, and in his hand he held a gun. He was breathing heavily, his shirt sleeve torn. He didn't speak. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his primary concern not the battle raging downstairs, but her. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled her from the bed and onto the floor, shielding her body with his own behind the solid bulk of the bed frame. He covered her completely, one arm wrapped around her shoulders, his body a protective wall between her and the door. Isabella could feel the rapid, powerful beat of his heart against her back. She could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the sharp, acrid smell of smoke. Shouts and the sound of scuffles echoed from the halls, but all she could focus on was the solid, real weight of him, the way his breath stirred her hair. In that moment of sheer terror, he wasn't her jailer. He was her only shelter, her only safety. As the noise from the hall began to die down, replaced by the grim voices of his men securing the area, the tension in Salvatore's body lessened by a fraction. He shifted slightly, just enough to look down at her face, pale and frightened in the dim light. His gaze was intense, searching. The fear, the adrenaline, the overwhelming relief of being alive, it all crashed over them at once. Slowly, never breaking eye contact, Salvatore lowered his head. Isabella didn't pull away. She couldn't. His lips met hers in a kiss that was nothing like the demanding, possessive dance from the party. This kiss was gentle. It was a question. It was full of the fear they had just shared, and a startling, tender vulnerability that left them both breathless. It was soft and searching, and over too soon. He pulled back, his dark eyes wide as if shocked by his own actions. The sound of a man clearing his throat at the doorway broke the spell. Salvatore stood up quickly, the mask of the ruthless boss snapping back into place as he turned to his lieutenant for a report. Isabella remained on the floor, her fingers pressed to her lips, which still tingled from his touch. The world had just tilted on its axis. The line between prisoner and protector had been irrevocably blurred, and they were both left standing on uncertain ground, wondering what, in the name of all that was holy, happened next. The kiss in the shadow of violence changed the very air in the mansion. In the days that followed, a new unspoken tension hummed between Salvatore and Isabella. It was in the way his hand would linger when he passed her a book in the library, his fingers brushing against hers for a moment too long. It was in the way she found herself listening for the sound of his footsteps in the hall, her heart giving a little jump when she heard them. The fear was still there, a cold stone in her stomach, but now it was tangled up with a wild, thrilling hope that felt just as dangerous. Salvatore was different too. The harsh lines of his face seemed softer when he looked at her. He began to give her gifts. It started with small things. A book of poetry by an artist she had mentioned she loved. A set of the finest, most delicate brushes for her work. Then came larger gestures. He had a special skylight installed in her restoration studio, giving her the perfect northern light she had wistfully described. He gave her more freedom within the house, allowing her to walk in the walled garden unattended. The guards who once watched her every move now simply nodded respectfully as she passed. But with each gift, each new privilege, the invisible chain around Isabella's heart seemed to grow tighter. She was falling in love with her jailer. The realization came to her one afternoon as she watched him from her balcony, standing in the garden below, his head bowed in thought. The feeling was as terrifying as any gunshot in the night. How could she love the man who held her captive? How could the walls of her prison start to feel so much like the home she had always wanted? She was living in a beautiful, gilded lie, and the weight of it began to crush her spirit more than the lock on her door ever had. Salvatore, for all his power, was equally lost. He who had never asked for anything in his life, only taken, now desperately wanted something he did not know how to get: her heart. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the way her smile would sometimes fade when she remembered her situation. He could command an army of men, but he could not command her love. The thought of her staying with him out of obligation, or worse, fear, became a poison in his veins. He loved her too much to let her live a half-life, even if that half-life was with him. The final test came when his men delivered their report on the attack. The man from the party, Marco, the one who had been pushy with Isabella, had not just been a drunken fool. He had been the one on the inside, the one who had provided the rival family with the layout of the mansion and the guards' schedules. He had betrayed Salvatore for money, and in doing so, had put Isabella's life directly in danger. A cold, familiar rage settled over Salvatore. This was the world he knew. This was the language he understood. Betrayal demanded a brutal, final response. He gave the order to his men in his study, his voice like chips of ice. "Bring him to the warehouse. I will deal with him myself." It was Isabella, standing unseen in the hallway, who heard the command. A chill ran down her spine. Without thinking, driven by a force she didn't understand, she pushed the door open and stepped into his study. The men looked at her, startled. Salvatore's eyes, dark and full of stormy anger, snapped to hers. "No," she said, her voice quiet but clear in the tense room. Salvatore stared at her. "This does not concern you, Isabella. Leave." "It does concern me," she insisted, stepping further into the room, her heart hammering. "You told me you became this man because your father was betrayed. You told me it made you hard because you had to be. But if you do this now, it won't be because you have to. It will be because you want to. It will be for revenge." She took another step, her gaze pleading. "You told me you see the man I could be. Now I am asking you to be that man. If you care for me at all, you will show me that there can be mercy in this world. Show me there is more to you than violence." The room was utterly silent. His men looked at the floor, unable to believe what they were hearing. No one ever questioned the boss. No one. Salvatore's jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might break. He saw the tears shimmering in her eyes, not of fear for herself, but for him, for the soul he was about to sacrifice. Her words struck a chord deeper than any threat ever could. She was not asking for Marco's life. She was asking for his. He looked at his men. His voice was low and heavy. Get him out of the city. Strip him of everything. If he ever shows his face in this territory again, then you have my order. But for now, banish him. The shock in the room was palpable. It was an unprecedented act of clemency. The men filed out, leaving Salvatore and Isabella alone. The anger had drained from him, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a single, crisp piece of paper. He held it out to her. It was her debt contract, the paper that had bound her to him. It's paid, he said, his voice rough with emotion. All of it. You are free, Isabella. She stared at the paper, not understanding. I cannot force you to love me, he continued, his eyes filled with a raw, aching honesty she had never seen before. I thought I could keep you here, and that would be enough. But it is not. I see that now. I can only hope that if you leave, your heart will bring you back to me. But you must choose. You must walk out that door because you want to, not because you can. He placed the paper in her trembling hand. Then he turned and walked out of the study, leaving her standing there, the document of her freedom feeling like the heaviest thing she had ever held. The next few days were a blur. Isabella packed her things with numb fingers. One of Salvatore's drivers took her back to her small, quiet apartment. The silence there was deafening. She was free. She could open her gallery. She could have the life she had dreamed of, but the dream felt hollow and empty. She tried to paint. She tried to read. She tried to plan. But her mind was always back in the mansion, in the library, in the garden. It was with him. She missed the sound of his voice. She missed the way he looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing in his world. A week passed, and the freedom she had craved for so long felt like a new kind of prison. A prison of her own making, built from fear and doubt. Finally, she could bear it no longer. She put on the simple blue dress, the one she had worn the night he first danced with her. She didn't call. She didn't send a message. She simply went. The massive gates of the Rossi estate opened for her. She walked up the long driveway, her heart in her throat. The front door was opened by a guard, whose eyes widened in surprise before he nodded and stepped aside. She walked through the familiar halls, her footsteps echoing, until she found him. He was in the grand ballroom, standing alone in the exact spot where they had danced. He was staring out the window, his back to her, his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the world. He looked more lonely than she had ever seen him. He heard her footsteps and turned slowly, as if he feared he was dreaming. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the space between them filled with all the unspoken words, all the fear, all the hope. Then Isabella took a deep breath, her voice soft but steady in the vast quiet room. "Salvatore," she said, "will you dance with me?" A look of pure, unguarded emotion washed over his face. It was relief. It was joy. It was love. He crossed the room in a few strides, and this time, when he took her hand, it was not a command. It was an answer. It was a promise. He pulled her into his arms, and they began to move slowly, to a music that only they could hear. There were no threats, no debts, no chains between them. There was only the two of them, choosing each other, freely and completely, finally finding their way home in each other's arms. Did Isabella and Salvatore's love story capture your heart? Their journey was filled with danger, passion, and the power of a single choice. If you yearn for more tales of fierce love and the strength it takes to choose it, subscribe to the channel for weekly stories that explore the deepest corners of the heart. Let us know in the comments what you love most about Salvatore and Isabella's unforgettable romance.